My name is Anna Peterson. I'm 68 years old. People say that women my age should live in peace, cared for by their children, and enjoy retirement. But truthfully, only those who have never been a mother could think that an elder's life is so simple. I live alone in my old bungalow, at the end of the street. The paint is peeling on the walls, and the shingled roof creaks with every gust of wind. But this is the home my husband and I built almost 45 years ago. Every brick, every shingle soaked with our sweat, tears, and even the aroma of our modest dinners. Now that my husband is gone, I live more on memories than with my own family. The only family I have left are my son, Paul, and his wife, Susan. That day, I was just mixing dough for some apple turnovers. The dough hadn't even had a chance to rise when Susan burst into the house like a cold gust of wind. Paul followed, head bowed, clutching a stack of legal-sized papers. I didn't even have time to wipe my hands before I heard Susan's voice. "Mom, we're in a huge hurry. My mother's been hospitalized. We need money. Sign these documents to transfer the house's ownership so we can sell it and pay for her treatment." I froze. My hands were still covered in flour. The flour dust settled on the hem of my apron, but the cold I felt wasn't from the dough. It was from my daughter-in-law's words. I looked at Susan and saw that her eyes no longer held the deferential girl who had once humbly accepted a simple wedding gift from me. Standing before me was a stranger, deciding my fate in my own home as if I were nobody. Then I turned to Paul, the son I had once carried in my arms, walked to school in the drizzle, and for whom I'd spent sleepless nights by his bedside when he was sick. Today, he stood there, not a word in his mother's defense, not a hand extended, only his head lowered as if he were guilty of something. He didn't look me in the eye, only repeated like a broken record, "Sign it, Mom. Susan's mom is in critical condition. If you don't sign, and something happens to her, it'll be on your conscience." I quietly, silently, scoffed. I had built this house, saving every dollar for over 15 years, selling produce from my garden at the farmer's market. And now it had become a hostage to a request that seemed sweet, but was fundamentally cruel. "Mom," Susan interjected with icy calm. "Think about it. You live here alone. You're old. What do you need such a big house for? Sign it. We'll sell it, pay the bills, and we'll send you $1,500 a month for living expenses. If you want to go to a retirement home or rent a small room, whatever you like." I didn't answer. I wasn't afraid of poverty. I was afraid of what they called filial care, but which came with conditions. I silently wiped my hands on my apron, went to my room, took out a box of herbal tea, brewed a fresh pot, and poured 2 cups. "Drink your tea and go. I still need to finish these turnovers. I promised Aunt Carol I'd bring her some this morning." My voice was quiet, but each word landed like a heavy stone. Susan slammed her palm on the table. "Are you trying to avoid answering? Don't think you can just stay silent like this. If you don't sign, you'll be blaming us." At that moment, for the first time, I truly looked long and hard at my daughter-in-law's face. A face that had once shyly accepted a wedding ring on her wedding day now was hard, imbued with calculation. I swallowed. "All right. I'll give you my answer tomorrow." Susan jumped up, pulling Paul by the arm towards the door. Her last words drifted back from the threshold. "Do you want my mother to die? Keep dragging your feet." The thump of their shoes on the concrete path echoed like hammer blows, destroying every inch of ground I had cultivated with my labor. I was left alone, staring at the 2 teacups, from which steam still rose. My heart didn't ache. It felt hardened. Perhaps any pain, if repeated too often, eventually dries up, but I was not as weak as they thought. I quietly pulled out the drawer under the tea table and took out a wooden box. Inside lay a tiny USB drive, a small item holding 2 months of recordings of cold conversations in a house that once seemed a bastion of warmth. I used to think I was just a shadow in this house, that it was enough to be silent and step aside so my children could live their own lives. But today, I understood. Some children don't need a mother. They only need their mother's name on a property deed. I didn't know much about laws, but one thing I knew for sure. If you don't stand up for yourself, no one will notice you being trampled. From that moment, I decided I wouldn't sign anything. except perhaps a signature under my own honor and self-respect. Dear friends, this is only the beginning. If you've ever felt the same way I have, having lived your whole life for your children, only to become a burden to them, listen to this story to the end. It's told not just for entertainment, but to warn, to protect yourself. Don't forget to subscribe to Golden Age Stories, where truthful, touching, and sobering stories are told by those who have lived through the pain themselves. I once thought that if I lived a good life, yielded, and didn't bother anyone, people would love me. But one day, I realized there are people to whom you are a nuisance just by breathing. I've lived in this house since I was a young wife. My husband was alive then. We were poor, ate baked potatoes, and drank well water. But I never felt humiliated. When he died, only I remained in the house. Then Paul married Susan, a tall girl with a quiet voice and a college degree. When she entered our home as my daughter-in-law, I rejoiced as if I'd found a treasure. I took off my old wedding earrings, sold them, and bought her a simple gold ring, a modest gift from a mother-in-law. She thanked me, bowing her head, tears in her eyes. I, too, was moved. If a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had such a relationship, what more could one wish for in life? But sweetness, as a rule, is short-lived. At the first dinner after the wedding, I prepared Paul's favorite pot roast, which I lovingly cooked in the old oven. I gave Susan a better piece. She bowed her head and smiled politely. Thank you. I don't eat such fatty food. Homemade meals are too heavy for me. I froze for a moment. Well, everyone has their own tastes. I nodded, placing a light salad I had prepared separately for her on the table. But when I turned to go to the kitchen, I heard her whisper to her sister, who was sitting nearby. Mom warned me not to eat anything from communal dishes, and the smell of that Vapo Rub, it gives me a headache. I pretended not to hear, but my hands trembled. The jar of menthol balm I used to rub on my aching joints every evening had now become an avoided scent. That evening, I put the balm at the bottom of the cupboard. I told myself, it's nothing serious. I'm old. The main thing is that they live in harmony. But I didn't know that the smell of Vapo Rub was just an overture to a symphony where I wasn't even invited to be the conductor. Another time, Susan's relatives, some aunts who all worked in a bank, came to visit. I had just finished sweeping the yard and hadn't even had time to change when Susan ran up to me. Mom, adults from my side are coming today. Don't set the table. I'll do everything myself. I was even pleased, thinking, what a resourceful daughter-in-law I have. I smiled and went to the kitchen. There I saw her arranging food on a new dinnerware set I had never touched. Guests, honey, let me help. I'll slice some fresh cucumbers, I offered. She turned and with a slight smirk, replied, No, Mom, thank you. I'll do everything myself to ensure it's clean. My relatives are very particular. I remained silent, but when it was time to sit at the table, I understood everything. There were exactly 6 place settings on the table, just for her family and for her and Paul. There was no place for me. I looked around, smiling awkwardly. I thought we would all have dinner together. She replied calmly. In our family, it's not customary for everyone to eat together, and guests will be uncomfortable with the smell of cooking. You can eat in the kitchen. It will be more comfortable for you there. I looked at Paul, hoping he would say something, but he just stared at his phone. I quietly asked, And where is my portion? Susan, carrying a tureen, replied, In the kitchen, Mom, on the small table. I left it warm for you. I went into the kitchen. On the small plastic table, wobbly by the window, there was a plate of cold rice, a piece of fried fish, and a bowl of cold soup. I sat down, turning to stone. The house, which I had saved for brick by brick, had become a place where I had to eat separately, like a servant. I remembered what my mother used to say. If the mother-in-law is made to eat at a separate table, it's a sign that the family's respect is crumbling. That evening, I sat on the porch. The wind rustled my hair, my eyes fixed on the moon. I had given birth to this son, raised him, healed him from all illnesses, and today, he sat at the main table while I ate cold food alone. But in my soul, there was no anger, no resentment, only a quiet sadness that settled on my shoulders like night dew. After that, everything went downhill. Susan didn't yell or argue. There was only coldness wrapped in sweet words, and Paul remained silent, as if stuck between two worlds, unwilling to step into either. One day, I caught a bad cold and couldn't sleep for several nights due to coughing. Feeling completely weak, I called Paul. After the third ring, Susan picked up. "Hello, who is this?" "It's me, Mom. I feel very ill. Check if there are any medicines. Please buy some for me." She was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Mom, you just have a common cold. Go to the clinic, ask for something. My husband and I are busy." I gave a bitter laugh. "I'm just asking you to buy it. I'll pay you back." "Oh, Mom, do you think I'm asking for money? But everyone gets sick like this. Drink some ginger tea, rest, and it will pass." That night, I rode my bicycle to the pharmacy on the corner myself. The pharmacist looked at me and shook her head. "Anna, out in this cold, buying medicine yourself? Why didn't you ask your children?" I chuckled hoarsely. "They're busy. A mother-in-law isn't someone you want to bother with." Returning home, I took the pills, pulled the blanket up, and curled into a ball. Not from the cold, but because for the first time in my life, I understood that even a mother needs permission to be cared for. The next day, they came again. This time, they said they wouldn't sell the house, only use the deed as collateral to temporarily pay the hospital fees for her mother. They promised to return everything, not to re-register anything. I looked at Paul. He mumbled shyly, like a mouse. "Mom, please sign. We're having a really hard time." But I said nothing. I went to my room, opened a drawer, and took out a laminated photocopy of the property deed that I had prepared in advance. I handed it to Susan, saying, "Well, I'm old. Do as you see fit." Susan rejoiced, snatched the paper, glanced at it, and said, "Thank you, Mom. I'll just take this to reserve a spot. When the original is needed, I'll come back." I nodded, but in my heart, I knew that this photocopy had no legal validity. But it was enough for me to see the true faces of those I once considered my children. A week after I gave her the photocopy, Susan returned. This time alone. There was no feigned eagerness, no hypocritical mask of virtue. She entered the yard and plopped onto the bench, as if it were her own home. "Mom," she called out. I was weeding the flower beds by the porch at the time. My hands were in the dirt. Susan smiled tightly, surveying the yard. "The documents are almost ready. We sent them to the bank. They should approve the loan tomorrow." I nodded silently. I knew perfectly well that a photocopy was just a piece of paper. If the bank accepted it, it was only on their word, believing blindly. And if they said the loan was approved, it smelled of deceit. Susan finished her glass of water and looked at me sideways. "You didn't even call, didn't ask how my mother was, and she's already recovered. This morning you were." I turned fully and looked her straight in the eyes. "Is that so? And last week you both said the doctor said she was in critical condition and needed urgent surgery." Susan shrugged. Her voice became light, as if she were talking about a child's scraped knee. "Well, she just had a common gastritis. The doctor prescribed pills, told her to take them at home, and everything would pass. But she's old. She likes to moan about pain. So we got worried, thought it was something serious." I sat down on a chair, my hands gripping the armrests. "So, that day, when you begged me to sign the papers, you deliberately exaggerated everything?" She laughed quietly, but in her laughter was a hidden threat. "Oh, Mom, why are you being so dramatic? Let's just say we used the situation to solve our problems. No one died after all." I looked her straight in the eyes. I didn't shout, didn't protest. I just wanted to see how much humanity was left behind that phrase. No one died, after all. I slowly asked, "And if I had given you the original that day and signed everything, whose name would this house be in now?" She didn't answer immediately, just smiled, playing with her nails. "Mom, do you think we could deceive you? You're my mother-in-law after all." "Not to that extent." I didn't answer. A long, slow sigh escaped from inside me. There are people who pretend to be kind, to hide their predatory intentions. And there are those who sincerely believe in their own decency, simply because they haven't killed anyone with their own hands. Susan stood up, picked up her purse. Her gaze wandered distractedly around the yard. Before stepping out the gate, she turned. "Mom, don't worry. We've thought about you too. When we sell the house, I'll send you a little money for your old age. Living alone in such an old house isn't easy, is it? I didn't answer. I just watched her silhouette disappear behind the rosebush fence. That silhouette belonged not to my daughter-in-law, but to a person who was already mentally measuring every square foot of land that didn't belong to them. I picked up the paper she left on the table. A loan agreement, fine print, convoluted terms, just as I thought. It wasn't a temporary collateral, as she had said, but a consent to complete alienation of property. I folded it and put it in the drawer, under the tablecloth on the dresser. Then I opened the wooden box, took out the USB drive, and inserted it into the small voice recorder hidden under the nightstand. I sat for a long, long time. In my soul, there was no longer anger, but a cold, a piercing cold, like a December wind sweeping across an old field. It didn't burn the skin, but it chilled to the bone. That evening, I called a young lawyer whose business card my old friend, Aunt Betty, had given me once. I told him about the photocopy of the deed, about the sweet persuasions that rubbed salt into the wound. The man on the other end of the line was silent for a moment, then asked, "Do you have any evidence?" "Audio recordings, for example." I opened the box, took out the USB drive, and firmly replied, "Yes, everything is recorded from the moment they started talking about saving her mother until they called me a senile old woman." The lawyer calmly but emphatically said, "Very good, Anna Peterson. Rarely do elderly people manage to prepare before they are defrauded. If you agree, I will help you file a request to prohibit any registration actions with your property. And if necessary, we can notify the local police officer and invite the parties for a discussion." I asked, "Is court mandatory?" "No, Anna Peterson, not necessarily. If you don't want to file a lawsuit, we'll do it differently. The main thing is to officially record that you do not consent to any transactions, and then the property will remain yours." The next morning, I gave my consent. That night, I made an entry in my old notebook. "To protect your honor, never stay silent until the end." The next day, I began a thorough cleaning of the house. Not to make it spotless, but to prepare for the headwind I no longer intended to dodge. I wiped my husband's framed photograph. The glass was dulled by time, but his gaze in the photo was calm and stern, as if he were looking at me. I quietly chuckled, not to calm him, but to remind myself, if the living cannot preserve their dignity, their life is no better than death. 3 days later, Susan returned. This time not alone. Paul walked with her, still with his head bowed and shoulders slumped, like a person who had made a mistake but didn't know exactly what it was. But Susan was the same. Her high heels clacked on the concrete path, her purse on her side, lips brightly painted, face under a thick layer of powder, but the tension in her eyes was unconcealed. She entered the house and, without sitting down, took a folder of documents from her bag and pushed it towards me. "Mom, that copy was a photocopy, so the bank didn't accept it. This time, I need the original deed. Give it to me. I'll do everything else myself. I'll take care of everything." I wiped my hands and poured tea. My voice was even. "I'll sign. You'll get the money. And where will I live?" Susan smiled sweetly, as if she had rehearsed a role. "Mom, we're only taking out a loan. The documents will remain in your name. I told you, you'll live here, just as before. No one will kick you out." I turned to Paul. He remained silent, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I asked, "I'll sign. But what if you can't pay later, and the house is foreclosed on for debt? What then?" Susan frowned, but immediately softened her tone. "Mom, who do you take us for? We're not strangers. I'm your daughter-in-law. Just trust me." I didn't answer. Just said, "I need time to think. I can't give anything now." Susan frowned, even harder. "My goodness, Mom, we're in a hurry. The bank already has our documents. If we're late, we'll miss the loan approval deadline. All our work will be for nothing." I stood up, opened the dresser, and took out an old, now invalid, notarized copy, and a small sheet of paper on which was written, "Statement of Non-Consent to Alienation of Property in Any Form." I placed it on the table and gently pushed it towards her. "This is all I can give you right now. Susan took the papers, scanned them quickly, and her face darkened. This copy is no longer valid. Mom, are you mocking us? I calmly replied, I'm not mocking anyone. I'm just protecting what belongs to me. And you'd do better to protect your conscience. Paul took Susan's hand and quietly said, Enough, Susan. Mom's not giving it. So that's it. But Susan didn't give up so easily. She took out her phone and put it on speaker, as if to pressure me even more. Hello? Is this Susan Davis? You have problems with the documents. The bank requires the original property deed. A photocopy is not enough. Ask the owner to sign additional consents, otherwise you will miss the credit approval deadline. I heard every word, as if they were needles piercing an old sweater. Paul gently tugged Susan's sleeve, whispering, Mom heard everything. But Susan was unyielding. She hung up the phone and turned to me. Mom, we really need this. Why are you holding on to it? We're not taking anything from you for free. When we sell, I'll send you money, and you won't have to worry about anything. But I sat motionless. My gaze was fixed on the old wooden table. A table my husband had built nail by nail, leveling every corner. Every scratch on its surface was a testament to the years we lived together, raising our son with honesty and simplicity. And now, this table was a witness to how people haggled over every inch of the land on which I stood. I quietly said, Once, before your wedding, I sold my wedding ring to help with the engagement, and now you want me to pay for it with my house. Susan sighed, as if I were the most obtuse person in the world. Mom, why do you always bring up the past? Now this is your responsibility. You live alone. What do you need this land for? I nodded. Yes, you're right, but I'm holding on to this land not because I need the house, but because I need my self-respect. I stood up and went to my room, not saying another word. They sat for a little longer, then left without saying goodbye, without looking back. I only heard the thud of their footsteps and the loud clang of the iron gate, like a period at the end of my patience. I turned on the recording on the USB drive again. Susan's voice, Paul's voice, the bank employee's voice. A mixture of pretense and calculation. I labeled the file, reserved a spot, waiting for the original. I knew I didn't have much time left, but I also realized that I shouldn't succumb to senility just because someone thought I was crazy. I sat quietly by the small cross. The yellow light of the devotional candle illuminated the figure on the old wooden board. I poured myself some tea and whispered, Don't worry, I won't let them sell even the back on which I carried him. After they left, a strange silence fell over my house, but I knew it was only the calm before a new storm. The human soul is like a surface of water. The calmer it is, the more suspicious. On Thursday afternoon, I was hanging laundry behind the house and heard Susan talking on the phone somewhere near the gate. She stood hidden around the corner of the fence, thinking I couldn't hear her. But old people's ears aren't always deaf, especially when they've grown accustomed to living in silence for too long. Yes. The doctor said, we just need to get confirmation that she has signs of mild dementia, and then we can temporarily become her guardians. Yes, exactly. Due to her health condition and lack of a caregiver. We're not doing this out of spite, you understand. I froze in place. I didn't listen to the entire conversation, but that was enough to understand. They had begun planning to deprive me of my legal capacity, fabricating a pretext that I had lost my mind. That evening, I didn't eat dinner. I just poured myself a cup of tea and sat in the dark on the porch. Beside me lay my old tabby cat, who had lived with me for almost 15 years. I stroked his back and quietly said, They think I've gone mad. But madness doesn't mean muteness. I hear, I remember. And if I'm silent, it doesn't mean I don't know. The next morning, I called Paul. I said I felt ill, was coughing badly, and couldn't eat. He stammered, then handed the phone to Susan. Hello, Mom? Oh, Mom, why do you call so often? We're busy, and you keep calling. I can't do this. I quietly moaned, I feel very unwell, dear. My head is spinning, my whole body aches. Please buy me some medicine. Susan sighed. Mom, drink some ginger tea and rest. I'll drop by tomorrow. And don't call anymore. My husband is in a meeting. I hung up and silently looked at the small, lighter-sized camera I had hidden on the bookshelf. The blinking indicator showed that it was recording. I saved the new file under the name Mom Shouldn't Call Too Much. The next day, they arrived. Susan, entering the house, immediately looked around. "Well, Mom, are you feeling better?" I weakly shook my head. My head is still spinning. "I think it's my blood pressure." Paul placed a container of oatmeal on the table and quietly said, "I bought some oatmeal. Mom, eat some. You need to rest." Susan, not wasting time, took another stack of documents from her bag. "Mom, these are just a few additional papers the bank requires. Sign them at the same time to make it easier. Nothing serious. Just confirmation that you agree to our use of the property for 5 years." I leaned on my hand to stand up, coughed, and my eyes watered. "Why sign more? Weren't the previous papers enough?" Susan smiled tightly. "Mom, you're tired, so you're forgetting. I keep telling you, we're not selling the house, not transferring it, just signing to confirm the legality of the lending process for the bank. There'll even be a lawyer as a witness." I looked deep into her eyes. I no longer saw the girl from the wedding. I only saw a deep, slippery, dark pit. I slowly said, "I'm not afraid you'll sell the house. I'm afraid I'm being weighed and valued on paper." Susan laughed. "Mom, you're tired and saying strange things." I sat on the chair and sighed. "Yes, I'm tired. I can't sign. Let's do it tomorrow." Susan's gaze darkened, her eyebrows furrowed, her fingers drummed on the table. "Mom, you're always dragging your feet. If they don't trust us, even your signature won't help." "Enough, Susan," Paul intervened. "Let's do it tomorrow, when Mom feels better." Susan fell silent, but as they were leaving the house, I still heard her muttering, "With this approach, we'll have to get documents for her incapacitation." I stood in the shadows, my hands clasped behind my back. The camera was still recording. Now I opened the folder with the documents and read. At the bottom, in tiny print, it said, "Agrees to the full transfer of property rights in the event that Party A is unable to sign additional documents after 30 days. I quietly chuckled. They were acting step by step, waiting for me to weaken, to assume I had already signed everything. Sometimes death isn't as terrifying as being considered dead while you're still alive. That night, I turned on the voice recorder and copied all the files to a second USB drive, just in case. I didn't sleep all night, not out of fear, but because for the first time in many years, I realized I had no right to be weak. That day, there was neither sun nor rain, but a muggy humidity portended a storm. I was sorting old towels in the closet when I heard the familiar sound of a motorcycle in the yard. Susan entered first, with the same determined stride. Her gaze swept through the house, as if she were taking inventory. Paul shuffled behind her, carrying a container of oatmeal and several folders of documents. I hadn't even stood up when Susan began without greetings or preliminaries. "Mom, this time I won't beat around the bush. The bank has suspended our loan approval. Give me the original property deed, and I'll sign everything myself. I'll take care of everything." I sat down with difficulty. My back ached from lying down for so long. Paul placed the oatmeal on the table. "Mom, eat at least a little to regain your strength, then sign a couple of papers. It's not difficult." I looked at the oatmeal, at my children. The oatmeal was still hot, but their gazes were icy. I quietly asked, "I'll sign, but where will I live?" Susan immediately replied, as if reciting a script, "Mom, you'll stay here, as before. The documents will be in your name." "I told you, we'll just be the borrowers. What's wrong with that?" I looked at Paul. He averted his gaze. His hands, holding a glass of water, trembled. I quietly said, "I'm not afraid you'll sell the house. I'm afraid you've stopped seeing me as your mother." At these words, Paul flinched, looked up, wanted to say something, but Susan interrupted him. Her voice became sharp. "Will you sign or not? People won't wait any longer. If you don't sign, you'll be responsible for the consequences." I slowly stood up and went to my room. 10 minutes later, I returned, holding a thin folder. I placed it on the table and pushed it towards them. "This is an old notarized copy. It has no legal force. If you need to reserve a spot, use this." Susan opened the folder, and her face went pale. Paul took my hand, his voice trembled. Mom, we're in a difficult situation. If you sign now, you'll save the whole family. I looked him straight in the eyes, without reproach, without shouting. Save whom? Your mother-in-law had mild gastritis. She's been home for a long time. Who else needs saving? Susan was embarrassed, and then suddenly yelled, Just say what you mean directly. Stop beating around the bush. I calmly replied, I don't want to say anything. I'm just protecting what belongs to me. And you'd do better to protect your conscience. That evening, I sat alone in the old kitchen, the plastic table with peeling paint, the pot of uneaten oatmeal. I didn't eat. I just sat and listened to the quiet click of the hidden camera, saving the video recording of tonight's dinner. I knew this was the last dinner where I, as a mother, was still being persuaded. After this night, they wouldn't wait anymore. They would make a big move, cut me out of the game, proving that I had lost my mind. I sat in silence for a long time, then opened the table drawer, took out my small notebook, and added another entry in purple ink. When children stop seeing you as a mother, dinner stops being dinner. It becomes a secret meeting to legalize the deprivation of your human rights. And so, 3 days later, I went to the local community clinic. I pretended to be a little distracted, confused the names of medicines, and said I'd forgotten my insurance card. The nurses laughed. Anna, you've been a bit forgetful lately. I nodded and smiled. Old age, dears, my mind isn't what it used to be. But after that, I quietly went into the director's office and asked for a routine psychiatric evaluation. The result was unequivocal. Of sound mind and memory, no signs of incapacitation found. I put this certificate in my folder of documents and locked it in a metal box. Documents are not only for use, they are weapons in case someone wants to rob you under the pretext that you are old and insane. I was never afraid that my children would be poor. I was afraid they would be rich in deceit, and today, I knew for sure, I was no longer a mother. I was a card in their game, and they were waiting for me to make a wrong move to deliver the decisive blow. But I wouldn't let that happen. Not when I remembered every time they made me sign papers for the sake of caring for someone else. That day, the sun was scorching. I was sweeping the porch, holding a broom. My back ached slightly from fatigue. Then I saw a familiar figure enter the yard. Deborah Miller, Susan's mother. She wore a floral purple dress, carried an expensive leather handbag, and her lips were painted bright red. She walked across the yard with such confidence, as if entering her own home. I lifted my head and nodded. Hello. She smiled slightly. And a good day to you, Anna. I had some free time, so I decided to drop by. I heard from the children that you have some doubts about the house, so I came to talk as a friend. I gestured to the bench, inviting her to sit. She placed her bag on the table, looked around, and threw out a short phrase. The house is old-fashioned. Yes, simple, but with taste. But living like this all the time, it must be boring. Why bother holding on to this house? I poured tea. My voice was even. I've lived here for several decades. I'm used to it. She took the cup, took a sip, and looked at me. Her gaze became more serious. To be honest, I'll tell you frankly, the children are very worried. They always say, Mom, if Grandma had signed the house documents earlier, we wouldn't have to struggle so much. I listen to them, and I feel sorry for them. Young people today are forced to calculate everything, not like us in our time. I continued to remain silent, holding my cup of steaming herbal tea. Deborah Miller continued. Her voice became softer, but every word was distinct. I'll tell you honestly, Anna, a house is just a means. In relationships between people, the main thing is the soul. If we love our children, we should think about the future. You'll hold on to the house, and tomorrow, God forbid, something happens, and you won't have time to leave a will. And who will inherit it? Who knows? I slowly placed my cup on the table. You're right. A house is a means, but it's also a place where a person can find refuge when there's no one else left. She scoffed, but this time couldn't hide the irritation in her voice. You speak beautifully, but in reality, you live alone. There's no one by your side. Tomorrow, God forbid, you fall ill, who will take care of you? And you know, my daughter, She's hot-headed, but not malicious. She's just afraid that older people can be stubborn. I looked her straight in the eyes, and I'm afraid that young people are too good at pretending to be caring. This phrase caused the atmosphere to tense. Deborah Miller leaned her hands on her knees and sighed. I'm just speaking from the heart. What mother doesn't want to take care of her children and grandchildren? If this house is put in Paul's name, they'll have stable housing. They won't have to take out loans. And how much longer do you have to live anyway? I pressed my lips together. My heart skipped a beat, but my face remained unchanged. I asked, about my grandson. Has he ever called me grandma, or is he still too young and has already been taught to call me something else? Deborah Miller shrugged and smirked. Oh, those are minor things. You'll raise him, and he'll call you grandma. I nodded, my voice softer. You're largely right, but I'll tell you honestly, I don't regret the house. I regret the soul you spoke of. It seems that in the list of property that needs to be transferred, no one considered my soul. Deborah Miller was silent for a few seconds, then, unwilling to continue the conversation, stood up and straightened her dress. All right, I don't want to talk much. I hope you'll think everything over. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll turn from in-laws into strangers, and everyone will laugh at us. Yes, I quietly nodded. Thank you for your concern, but I've lived my life so that no one laughs at me, and so that no one teaches me when to cry. She left. The yard became empty. I washed the cups, the teapot, hung the towel on the line. The evening breeze carried the scent of herbal tea from the porch, lingering at the bottom of the cup. I sat on the steps and looked at the faded roof. I knew for sure that the upcoming battle would no longer be about whether to sign or not sign. It would be about trust. And when trust is lost, any signature is just a legally formalized trap. That night, I lay in bed, but I couldn't sleep. I remembered my husband, the day he brought me on a cart with bricks to lay the path in the yard. He said then, "We don't need a big house. The main thing is that it's our home and that the word mom is heard in it." That's it. The house remained, but that call was no longer sincere. I woke up earlier than usual. A cold fog still hung outside. The sun hadn't risen yet. My old cat curled up under the blanket in the corner of the bed, and I had already carefully packed all the documents into a canvas bag, put on my scarf, and left the house. My path led to the law office, which I had walked past for so many years, never thinking I would one day cross its threshold. But this time, I came not to notarize papers, but to stop an intrigue. I placed the folder on the employee's desk. She looked at my age, at the content of the statement, then looked up and quietly asked, "You want to register a prohibition on real estate transactions?" I nodded. "I want to formalize my right to refuse to alienate this property. My trust is being abused." The young woman was surprised for a moment, but asked no more questions. She accepted the statement, made a photocopy of my ID, and explained where to sign. Her voice was soft but firm. Once the data is entered into the registry, anyone who tries to use documents for this property to make a transaction will have to obtain your personal confirmation. Without your consent, the notary will refuse registration. I nodded, tightening my grip on my bag's handle. When I left the office, I felt an extraordinary lightness. Not because I had won, but because for the first time, I had stood up for myself. Not with tears, but with the law. That same day at noon, Susan called. Her voice was no longer sweet. It held irritation. "Mom, the bank informed us that a lien has been placed on the documents. What does that mean? Who did this?" I took a sip of water and calmly replied, "I did." She fell silent for a moment, then screamed, "Are you crazy? We didn't do anything wrong. Why did you place a lien?" I quietly scoffed. "I didn't place a lien on you. I placed a lien on greed, disguised by the name of children." Susan snarled into the phone. "So you decided to side with strangers instead of trusting your own children?" I slowly replied, "Those who consider me their own. I call my children, and those who see in me only a walking signature, I'm sorry. I'm not obligated to trust them." That evening, Paul came alone, unannounced. He sat on the porch for a long time before knocking on the door. I opened it. He looked thinner, his hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He didn't enter the house, just stood on the threshold. His voice trembled. "Mom, why did you let it come to this?" I replied, "Because if I hadn't, I would have nothing left. No honor, no soul, no self-respect. Only an old body waiting to be taken." Tears flowed from Paul's eyes. I was wrong, but I didn't think I was that wrong. I just wanted to help my wife. I looked at him. My heart ached, but my words did not soften. "You helped your wife by trampling your mother, forcing her to sign paper after paper, and then pretending you knew nothing. You can be silent before the whole world, but you should not have been silent before your own blood." He said nothing more, just lowered his head and turned, walking toward the gate like a shadow. That night, I gathered all the audio recordings, copies of the property deed, the mental health certificate, the prohibition statement, everything into one folder. I put it in a Ziploc bag and placed it on the top shelf of the closet. I lit the devotional candle, knelt before the cross, and whispered, "Lord, I have lived to these years for this home. This is the sweat and blood of both of us. If I fall, it will not be from old age, but because there is no one left to defend the truth." I stood up, poured myself some tea, and sat alone in the middle of the house. For the first time in my life, I felt peace, not because my children loved me, but because I was no longer afraid of being used under that pretext. The next morning, I received a summons from the local police department. It clearly stated, "Citizen Anna Peterson is invited to appear at 9 a.m. at the community precinct for a conciliatory discussion regarding a family property dispute involving interested parties." I folded the paper, nothing surprising. Susan had begun to act after her ability to transfer the property was blocked. They couldn't go the official route, so they decided to involve the community to exert pressure. I didn't tremble, just took a deep breath. I arrived on time, dressed in a simple cotton house dress. In my hands was the same canvas bag with neatly folded documents, a copy of the property deed, the mental health certificate, transcripts of the audio recordings, the notarized prohibition, and even photographs taken the day. Susan had kicked me from the table. A few minutes later, Paul and Susan entered. Susan was in a business suit with neat makeup. Her face seemed to have been rehearsed in front of a mirror. It held just enough worry, as it did politeness. Paul walked behind her, head down and not looking at me. The discussion was led by Officer Miller, a man in his 60s who had known me for a long time. He sat between a representative from social services and a community outreach worker. The officer began. "First of all, we are very sorry that such a legal dispute has arisen in Anna Peterson's family. Today's discussion is merely aimed at helping the parties understand each other. It has no coercive force and no immediate legal ramifications. I ask everyone to speak calmly." Susan spoke first. Her voice was quiet and plaintive, like a victim's. "Respected officer, esteemed attendees, I just want to say that from the very beginning, my husband and I have only cared for Mom. Her house is old. We wanted to take out a loan to renovate it. Mom didn't agree. All right, but now she's placed a lien on the documents, which makes us suspected of fraud. This severely harms our reputation, our jobs, our standing." Paul also spoke up. "Mom thinks we want to deceive her. But, Mom, I never thought that. I just saw how difficult things were for us, and we have a resource we can't use." Those present nodded sympathetically. The community outreach worker said, "Anna is already elderly. Perhaps she forgets things. The children are probably telling the truth." I remained silent. Then I opened my bag, took out the mental health certificate, and placed it on the table. "This is a conclusion from a psychiatric evaluation. I am of sound mind. If anyone is going to refer to my senility, please review this." Silence fell in the room. I continued, "I don't need anyone's renovation. My house, though old, is clean, and the feelings that need to be exchanged for property, I prefer to keep to myself." Susan frowned. "Mom, are you suspecting us again? If you don't believe us, then whom do you believe at all?" I looked at her with a calm gaze. I don't believe people who, when their mother is ill, cannot buy her a pack of pills, but hire lawyers to draw up a plan to seize her home. Susan immediately retorted, "Mom, you're exaggerating." I took out another printout, a transcript of an audio recording, and placed it on the table. This is a recording of your phone conversation, where you threatened me that if I didn't sign, I would be declared incapacitated. Your voice, your words. If necessary, I can play the original. Complete silence reigned in the room. Officer Miller adjusted his glasses and looked at Susan. She was covered in sweat. I didn't stop. I took out a photograph showing Susan sitting at the head of the table, and me eating in the kitchen, sitting on a stool by an aluminum bowl on the floor. I held it up. My voice trembled, but it was clear. This is my husband's memorial service. I, his wife, who lived with him half my life, was banished to the kitchen because the guests were squeamish. If anyone thinks I'm still being treated like a mother, let them tell me thank you. No one dared to utter a word. I turned to Paul. If there's even a drop of my blood left in you, you should know that I've lived alone for so many years, and no one could ever fault me for anything. And now my own son is ready to deprive me of everything. And you say I should remain silent. Paul bowed his head so low that I saw his tears dripping onto the floor. But I didn't soften. Those tears were too late. Officer Miller rubbed his forehead. All right. Anna Peterson is right. She has every right to her property. And you, young people, should go home and think carefully. We are here to help, not to interfere with your documents. If Anna Peterson does not give her consent, all transactions are invalid. Susan jumped up, enraged. Fine. I was wrong to think there was even a drop of love left in you for us. She turned and walked out. The clack of her heels on the concrete floor echoed coldly. Paul slowly stood up, looked at me with eyes full of remorse. Mom, forgive me. I was wrong. I was blind. I lost you. I didn't answer, just sat motionless. My trembling hands clutched the photograph. The conciliatory discussion ended without any agreement, but for me, it was a court of conscience. A court where everything was illuminated by the light of truth, without shouting, without prison sentences. But it was enough to make a person ashamed for the rest of their life. After that meeting, an unusual silence fell over my small home. No more sound of a motorcycle at the gate, no more fake greetings, no more cold oatmeal on the table, like a cheap form of consolation. I sat alone in the old living room. Before me was a cup of herbal tea, and next to it lay my old brown notebook. In it, I recorded fragments of memories. Every tear no one saw, every empty call of Mom, like an overturned cup, seemingly full but empty inside. I knew for sure that this was not the end. The calm after the storm is not peace, but the harbinger of a new, quieter, and more dangerous wave. But this time, I didn't wait. A week later, I drove to a law firm 6 miles from my house. I brought all my documents with me, including a copy of an old will that I had torn up 6 months ago when Paul advised me to divide everything among the children so they wouldn't quarrel. The lawyer, a young woman in her 30s wearing glasses, spoke in a quiet and calm voice, listened to me from beginning to end. She didn't interrupt, just made notes, and at the end asked, "Do you want to draw up a new will?" I nodded. "You won't leave anything to your son and daughter-in-law?" I paused for a moment, then replied, "I will leave them something, but not property. I will leave them a final lesson." In the new will, I clearly stated that, after my death, this house would pass into the ownership of a charitable organization to create a shelter for orphan children. Children who have no parents, and whom their own parents do not consider strangers. The remaining savings I divided into 3 parts. One for my funeral, the second for a fund to help the elderly, and the third in Paul's name with one condition: he would have to come for it personally and sign a letter of apology written in his own hand. Susan's name was not mentioned in the will. I held no ill will. I just no longer wanted anything to do with her. The lawyer, after reading, looked at me with slight surprise. "Are you really sure about this?" I nodded without the slightest hesitation. "If I die and they continue to divide my inheritance, it will mean that I spent my entire life buying a tragedy." That day, returning home, I tidied the table, lit the devotional candle, changed the candles. I told my husband everything, every word. I knew he wouldn't object. He was a man of honor, lived with dignity, and wanted to die the same way. In the evening, as a cool breeze began to enter the house through the open window, I looked into the yard. The yellow sun fell on the old brickwork. Dust motes swirled in the air like nameless scars. I said into the emptiness, "This house, in the end, will become a home for those who need it more, not a place to test the conscience of children." The next day, I went to my neighbor, Aunt Betty, my closest friend. I brought her some fruit and a small sealed envelope. I placed it on the table and said, "Betty, if anything happens to me, please give this to the lawyer. Inside is the original will. Don't let the children find it." Aunt Betty's eyes widened. "My goodness, are you so afraid of them?" I smiled, but I wasn't joking. I'm not afraid of them. I just don't want to live my life wisely, only to die a fool. That evening, I cooked a pot of dried fruit compote and called the neighborhood children. They chattered, calling me Grandma Anna. The youngest joked, "Grandma Anna, if you had such a big house, and we were your grandchildren, we wouldn't have anything to worry about." I laughed. "Yes, but Grandma's grandchildren no longer consider her their grandma." I wasn't sad. I felt light, because I understood that kinship isn't in blood, but in how people choose to relate to each other when they have nothing left to divide. A week later, Susan returned, this time without Paul. She entered the yard with a smile that mixed with mockery. "Mom, I heard you made a will. Who did you leave everything to? Or should we prepare for a funeral already?" I looked up at her, not arguing, just quietly saying, "You don't need to worry. When I die, this house will no longer be a matter of dispute." Susan's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I slowly replied, "I've given it to orphan children. When I die, these children will call me Grandma from the bottom of their hearts. You can't buy that with any property deed." Susan's face hardened, her cheeks flushed, her eyes reddened, not from emotion, but from defeat. She turned and left, not saying another word. I watched her go. In my soul, there was neither joy nor sadness, only the feeling that the final circle had closed. The rainy season began early. The first downpours seemed to wash away all the dust remaining on the old roof. Water collected on the banana leaves behind the house, cold and clear, as if nature itself wanted to cleanse everything of pain. I sat on the porch, wrapped in an old shawl, with a cup of hot tea in my hands. The house was the same, only the human soul had gone through many changes. Every drop hitting the roof echoed in my memory, reminding me of the storms that had passed not only outside, but also within. After the will story, everything went quiet. No one came to pressure me anymore. No one called to check on my health. In a house that was already sparsely populated, it became even emptier. But I didn't feel lonely. In fact, loneliness isn't the absence of people, but the absence of sincerity. And I had already seen through the human soul. I cleaned every corner of the house. Old drawers, the salt shaker in the kitchen, faded photographs. I wiped one of them especially carefully, afraid of tearing it. It was my wedding photo with my husband. We stood radiant in the garden behind the house. I touched his face in the picture and whispered, "Michael, I'm getting ready to leave our home. But not because I've given up, but to preserve our honor." Aunt Betty came in. She brought me a bunch of fresh greens and a few zucchini from her garden. She sat next to me on the porch, sorting dill, and quietly asked, "Anna, don't you regret it? Many people say you acted too harshly." I smiled. "Betty, it doesn't matter if it's harsh or gentle. What matters is that the soul remains whole. I've lived to my age not to be led by the nose, hiding behind the words, 'old mother,'" Aunt Betty sighed. "I admire you, honestly, but I'm also sad. If they truly loved you, this house wouldn't have become such a burden." I nodded. "Yes, but it's all right. In the end, this house will be home to those who truly need it." The neighborhood children still ran in to see me. They called me Grandma Anna, asked me to tell stories, enjoyed compote, and played hopscotch. One little boy asked, "Grandma Anna, when you die, can we still come here?" I laughed and patted his head. "Of course. I've already said that this house will become a home for children who have no one to hug. So, as long as your hearts are sincere, the doors of my house are open to you." The children didn't fully understand the meaning, but their eyes sparkled, and I suddenly felt lighter in my soul. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to learn to forgive those who don't deserve it. But one innocent word is enough to understand that life is still worth living. That night, I dreamt of my husband. In the dream, he sat in the yard in his old white shirt, fanning himself. I went out and called, "Michael." He looked up and smiled. "You did everything right. I've been waiting for you." I froze, not knowing whether to rejoice or grieve. I just felt tears streaming down my pillow. I wasn't afraid of death. I was afraid to die and remain a thing, used until the last minute. Now I was at peace. The next morning, I went to the garden, picked a few ripe apples, cut some mint sprigs, planning to make compote for the children. I had just started peeling the apples when I heard the sound of a motorcycle at the gate. A sharp brake. Familiar footsteps. Paul. He was in an old shirt, even thinner, with deeply sunken eyes. I looked up, but before I could say anything, he knelt in the middle of the yard under the pale rays of the morning sun. His voice broke. "Mom, forgive me. I was wrong. I was blind. I lost you." I froze, not from surprise, but because I had waited for these words for so long that I had almost stopped believing I would hear them. He took a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. It was a handwritten letter, as required by the will. I took it, my hands trembling, my heart aching. I read every word, every apology, every account of sleepless nights, of how he looked at his crying child and felt emptiness because he no longer had a mother. I didn't cry. I just placed my hand on his shoulder. "Stand up. I forgive you. But you must remember, you can get back all lost possessions. But familial love, once fallen into the dirt, even if lifted, will never be clean again." Paul nodded. His tears fell onto the brick path, mixing with the traces of yesterday's rain. August brought with it the scent of frankincense and the distant ringing of church bells in the scorching midday heat. I put on my old brown dress and slowly walked into the yard, as if entering the final act of my life. Without fear, without anxiety, only with complete peace. But my house was completely different now. It was no longer a place where tears were measured or property was weighed. It had become a true home, a place where people treated each other with kindness, not by right of blood. After his return, Paul seemed reborn. He quit his office job and started working at a community social services center. The work was hard, the pay was modest, but he told me, "Mom, I want to atone for my guilt with actions, not money." I watched him care for the children, clean the bunk beds, prepare food with the volunteers, and I felt warmth in my soul. Not from pride, but from knowing that my lost son had returned, not home, but to his conscience. And Susan. Since she learned that I had indeed transferred the house to a charitable organization, she became silent. Didn't visit, didn't call. Paul told me that she couldn't come to terms with what I had done, but he added, "I think this is also a way for her to confront herself." I didn't blame her and didn't wait for her, because I understood that some people come into our lives only to teach us a lesson, not to stay. The charitable organization officially accepted the house at the end of summer. A small sign was hung near the gate, "Anna's Haven for Children in Need and Elderly." Paul came up with the name. He said, "Mom, your name is Anna. I want everyone who lives in this house to find peace, just like you have." My throat tightened. I couldn't say anything, just turned away to hide the tears in my deep wrinkles. On the Apple Harvest Festival, Paul and I went to church. We brought a bouquet of white asters and placed them before the statue of the Virgin Mary. I didn't pin red or white flowers to my dress. I only pinned an empty safety pin to my chest, as a reminder that a mother's love, while it exists, needs no flowers to measure it, and when it's gone, nothing can replace it. The Reverend Sarah approached us, clasped her hands, and smiled. "Anna Peterson, you are so at peace today," I nodded. "Yes, Reverend, because my son has now learned to bow. And when a son knows how to bow, a mother can hold her head high." That evening, light shone in my small house, not because of a holiday, but because of the new residents' children in need, who now ran barefoot in the yard and now had a place to call home. They sat in a circle and sang children's songs. Someone drew on the walls, someone made paper lanterns. I sat among them like a quiet shadow. A little girl approached, tugged my hand, and asked, "Grandma, do you have children?" I looked at her and smiled. Yes, but now I have you too. That night, I made the last entry in my old notebook. If my life was a play, then the finale has now arrived. I did not die alone, because I was reborn in the hearts of children, not related to me by blood. I did not die in despair, because I dared to choose awareness instead of blind patience. I did not die in resentment, because I was able to teach my son to become a human again. The next morning, Paul brought me a bowl of chicken broth. I made this, Mom. Eat. You often made it for me when I was a child. Now it's my turn. I looked at him, and my breath caught. For so many years, I had lived to hear those words. And now, hearing them, I understood that life is not only bitterness, it has its sourness, but at the bottom, there is always a drop of sweetness. I knew I didn't have much time left, but I wasn't afraid, because everything that needed to be done, I had done. Everything that needed to be said, I had said. Everything that needed to be preserved, I had preserved for those who deserved it. I will leave. And when I leave, if that day comes, I want to leave to the laughter of children in a house named after me, and with a soul no longer burdened,